Continuing my stories about my mother, I'm going to concentrate today on some of her excursions into interior decorating. But first, I need to remind anyone that's listening that all the stories I tell you are true, because some of them sound as though I extricated them from a sitcom. But before I start off with the interior decorating excerpts, I must just round up my chat yesterday about my mother and needlework. But this one particularly features my father. My father was a good-looking, charming, quiet, well-spoken gentleman, and very rarely did he get roused. But when he did, he could always make his point felt, usually without raising his voice. Imagine this. It is tea time. In our kitchen there was the kitchen table. My brother, my mother and myself are sitting there ready to start our evening meal. And the back door opens and in walks my father, home from work. He gives us a cursory nod of greeting but doesn't say anything. And he went to the cupboard in the kitchen and took out from the floor of the cupboard a cobbler's shoe tree. If you know what one of those is, fair enough. If you don't, it's a metal object with 3 metal feet, different sizes, each of which designed to face in a different direction. And cobblers put boots and shoes on them when they're resoling them. My father also took from the cupboard, from his toolbox, a mallet. He comes to the table, takes off one shoe and one sock, still hasn't said a word. So there's my mother saying, "What's the matter, Stanley? Stanley, what are you up to?" And me saying, "What are you doing, Dad?" And my brother saying, "What's up, Daddy?" And my father didn't answer at all. When he had taken his sock off, he solemnly put it onto the biggest of the feet on the shoe tree and picked up the mallet and solemnly hammered his sock. Having done that, he removed the sock from the shoe tree, put the shoe tree and the mallet back in the cupboard, and sat down at his place at the table and solemnly passed to my mother the sock. And only then did he say, "That was a formal protest brought about by the pain I have endured all day as a result of your darning, darling." My mother's darning. My father's sock had a hole in it, a hole about 2 inches, 5 centimetres in diameter. And my mother had mended the hole in my dad's sock by doing a running thread stitch round the circumference of the hole and then pulling the whole thing tight and fastening off the thread. And my father had spent all day walking on a nasty knot of screwed up fabric that was now the middle of what had been the hole. My mother looked aghast, but didn't lose her temper. She instantly came up with a solution. She turned to me and said, "Jean, you can darn." And she turned to my father and said, "In future, give your holy socks to your daughter." Now, interior decorating. My mother was very house-proud. Our house always looked clean and nice and smart, and my mother would always be sweeping or dusting some trace of dirt or debris that only she could see. My father referred to all of her cleaning implements as her toys, and I believed him, and I'm sorry to say that one Christmas I bought my mother a new dustpan and brush for Christmas, and what's even worse, she thanked me for it. She also liked moving the furniture around. So living in our house was quite exciting because you never quite knew from one day to the next where anything would be positioned in the room, which meant that life meant a bit of a circular tour sometime if you were looking for something. She unfortunately caught a disease which at that time was prevalent. It was called Fablon fever. I don't know if you know what Fablon was. I don't know if you can still get it. You used to be able to buy it in Woolworths. It was rolls of self-adhesive paper which had patterns on them, and you could cut it out and you could stick it onto a surface if you wanted to decorate the surface or make the surface have a shiny top or a matte top. I still have some where the non-sticky side looks like green baize, and that's been quite useful over the many years if ever I've occasionally wanted to line a drawer or something like that. My mother bought a roll of red mottled Fablon because one of the surfaces in the kitchen was a bit sort of scuffed, and she put the Fablon on and liked the result. She had, of course, some Fablon left. She hadn't used the whole roll. So she decided to embark on covering another aspect of the kitchen surface top. Yes, you can guess. She ran out of Fablon, so she had to buy another roll. And so it went on. And it only stopped when even she herself decided that our kitchen was really rather overdone with mottled red, and that Fablon fever must end. She also was very good at getting out the toolbox if a job that she'd asked my dad to do, he was very good at household jobs, had not been done quick enough for her. Our kitchen table wobbled somewhat, and she decided one day that she would sort this out. So somehow, when she was in on her own, she managed to tip the table up on its side, get my father's hacksaw and chop a bit off one of the legs. When the table was put back onto its legs, it wobbled rather more than it had done to start with. So, never say die, she did the same thing again with a different leg, and so on and so forth. That game ended when my father, finding the results of the table still wobbly and now rather low, said if she carried on any more, he would get the table from the kitchen and put it in front of the sofa because it was more the height of a coffee table. That was exaggerating, and the wobble was dealt with as it always had been before she embarked on the chopping off of legs, by folding a piece of paper and sticking it under the lowest leg. But the pièce de résistance of my mother's interior decorating at that time was to do with the wallpaper bale. My parents decided that they wanted to wallpaper the sitting room, and they wanted a flamboyant wallpaper. They were weary of magnolia. So they go to the DIY shop and they bought a bargain bundle. The paper in question was a sort of wine colour with rather flamboyant silver palm trees on it. My dad had done a sum to make sure he had sufficient paper for the necessary size of the walls of the room, but he had slightly failed to take into account the repeat of the said pattern. Now, one of the alcoves near the fireplace in our sitting room had a pipe that ran right across it. It was always a bit of an eyesore, even when painted magnolia. One day we came home from school or work, and lo and behold, the paper was up on the wall, and the pipe had been cased in with some wood, like a shelf, and under the pipe the wallpaper was upside down. Above the pipe the wallpaper was the right way up, because that was the only way the last bit of wall could be covered with the trunks of the palm trees lining up. and the shelf had been painted a pale green. Rather surprising, because all the rest of the paintwork in the room was white. We congratulated my mother on the shelf, and eventually my brother said, "The palm trees under the shelf are the wrong way up." "Yes," said my mother, "there wasn't enough paper to make it line up the other way round." And I said, "And why is the shelf pale green?" "It's not pale green," said my mother. "It's eau de Nil." And I said, "But why?" And she said, "Well, don't you realise? The palm trees above the shelf are on the bank of the Nile, and the palm trees below are the reflections in the water." There was no answer to that. I'll tell you some more another time. Bye-bye.